We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm super excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Jenn Johnson. She is the Vice President of People, Culture, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at ezCater. Jenn, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our audience members, including your pronouns and when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Thank you, Christina. I'm happy to be here too. Okay, a little bit about me. I currently live in Colorado. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. Grew up and was raised there. So I am a transplant. I've been working at ezCater for about 2.5 years now and have had two roles. I was promoted from director to VP and my role changed a little bit. My pronouns are she, her, and hers as well. And when I was younger, I guess that's like an age specific question for me because I've wanted to be multiple things.
Okay.
But when I was younger, I was a writer. And so I was actually published in things. And that's how I got into college, was on a writer's scholarship. And then once I got to college, I wanted to be a psych major and I wanted to be a therapist. And so that's kind of what brought me to where I am.
I love that. I think it's really interesting when people in the people, diversity, equity, inclusion, and just folks that we talk to in the culture champion space say psychology or, they want to be a teacher because I'm sure using a lot of those skills on a day-to-day basis today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your personal journey and how it really has led you up until this point to be specifically at ezCater and, leading the people, culture, and DEI initiatives there?
Sure. So I've been in HR. I'm one of those weird folks who's been in HR my entire career. I've never done anything else as an adult with a professional job. I started out in HR as a administrator and entry level before we had business partners. I was a generalist. And so I've been doing HR for about 20 years in different businesses. Started out in government contracting because that's just what you do when you're from Baltimore, Maryland, or DC or Virginia or any of that territory, because that's the jobs. And then I moved into big business. And so I worked for big name brands and decided at some point that my passion for being able to see, hear, and value people equitably would not necessarily show up in a consistent way in a big branded business. They are old school. They're built on a foundation that is hard to shift. And so I wanted to move into something that was a little bit more flexible and forward looking. And so tech is that space. And I moved to ezCater after working at Starbucks for some time. And so have been at ezCater for 2.5 years, really enjoy my experience here.
In that 2.5 years that you have been there, I'm sure that you've worked on a multitude of projects, and a lot of folks probably ask your opinion on different processes, but I always like to ask in terms of, in this current moment, what's taking up the most brain space in Jenn's mind right now?
Equity and culture, specifically. I think when we think about the cultural transformation that all businesses are going to have to go through in order to stay competitive and not be left behind, which is it's a great thing following the kind of cultural awakening and awareness that came in 2020. Mm-hmm. We really have to center equity in that conversation. And I rarely hear that as a focus. I typically hear diversity as a focus. Right. And I liken that to inviting folks to your house and you haven't prepared for them. There's nothing for them to eat and nowhere for them to sit, right? So they don't feel comfortable. They're there. That's great. But equity is preparing for the folks that you're bringing in, right? Making sure that your frameworks that are inclusive, but also really allow people to be their authentic selves, which is a delicate balance because we're all so different and nuanced. And we want to stay away from stereotyping or tropes about what people need. So really it's about that cultural piece of asking what people need and developing your culture around the answers that you get, which is it's challenging.
Asking, actively listening, not assuming what people need and want in terms of equitable workplace and company culture. We're seeing a lot of innovation in the space. Business as usual is not cutting it, which is really great to see. In terms of measuring that quote unquote healthy space and making sure that you are listening and seeing your employees, are there any key ingredients that you would say really that are important for companies or leaders to measure to say, okay, we're making progress on this, we have a healthy company culture?
Mm. I think it has to start with psychological safety, and that starts from the top, right? So, what does your CEO and C suite do? How do they treat each other? How do they expect to be treated? What resources do they expect? Because a lot of the psychological safety of a business is driven by the culture that's created at the top, right? Because we all want to be successful, we all want to do well. And so we replicate what we see. Our mirror neurons and our brains just do that. And so it starts at the top. I would also say growth mindset starts there too. And that's a huge piece. Are you open to giving and receiving feedback?
Mhm.
I emphasize the receiving because people typically can tell you what's wrong, but if you tell them what's wrong, they bristle
Right.
or have reactions that make it feel unsafe for you to actually share what your experience is. And so, again, that asking is really important, but you have to create an environment that's safe to ask
Mhm.
and safe to answer. So, those are the two key things. And then I think like it's other things that kind of funnel into having a healthy and productive environment, right? So shared purpose, interdependence and belonging. You want to feel like you're a part of something. We all do. That's a human need.
Mhm.
Having boundaries, very important. And in tech, sometimes
Yeah.
we shy away from talking about having any form of boundaries or accountability. But those two things will keep your environment consistent. It's like holding the walls up, right? Making sure that people have some personal accountability as well as those personal boundaries. And then having an all voices matter culture is important too, because people need to be able to see themselves reflected in the decisions that are made. And I think the dirty little secret of HR is that we index on all of those things because they feel good. But then when those things don't happen, they don't show up for us, we wonder why. And the foundational element that we typically are missing is trained and developed leaders. We throw folks into roles because they want it, because they were great individual contributors and they're hungry. And so we want to give them another opportunity, but sometimes those folks don't make the best leaders, especially if we haven't trained and developed them in leadership. That leadership is its own thing, right? So I think all of those things, when you put them together and they actually are in that delicate balance, it shows up as people being not happy, but people feeling valued, right? Because happy shouldn't be the measure. I'm not happy every day. But I need to feel valued in my work every day.
Yeah, I mean, happiness inside and outside of work, you can't, it's not possible to be happy all of the time. And I
Mhm.
definitely agree with you that people, for the most part, want to feel that value, that sense of belonging, and that the work they're doing really, really matters. I love what you said about accountability and boundaries. I follow Dr. Nedra, boundaries expert on Instagram.
Mhm.
So read all of that content.
Mhm.
In terms of thinking about, okay, we have these measures in place to really ask for feedback, we train our managers. What is the difference between a good or quote unquote great company culture?
Mm. I think good is what most of us have experienced at work. Because despite what Twitter or now TikTok says about companies, most companies don't suck. Most companies have good cultures, right? They have an open-minded culture because companies need to stay competitive. So they want to hear innovative new ideas from people who are close to the work, right? So most companies have that element just for their own survival. Strong values is something that, I mean, that isn't a original concept of what a business is, right? Business is an entity. So a business has a mind, body, and kind of spirit, right? And we can kind of get into that conversation deeper. But I think when you look at the values, that's kind of the conscience of a company, or supposed to be. And so most companies have that. And then companies that I think are good nowadays, the measurement is diversity. And so you will see a representation of different faces at all levels of an organization. That's good to me. That's like a baseline.
Yeah.
If I don't see that, I'm not working for you, and no one else should, right? Like that's the baseline. I think great is having all of those things because that's a foundation. Going above and beyond that, right? So, how do you center equity and accountability in those conversations? What does that look like in that space, and how does that show up? And I beat the equity drum for literally everything. It
Yes.
is what's on my mind. But I think that's the differentiating factor, right? Is because equity is required for inclusion. You
Right.
can't have one without the other. And
Mhm.
so, in order to move from just diverse to inclusive and a place where people feel like they belong, which is kind of the new buzzword, right? Belonging. You have to have equity. It's an intentional element that has to be baked into everything that you do.
It definitely has to be intentional. And I know one of the measures you mentioned earlier too is how the leadership team treats each other as well. And I think it's important that leaders, people managers that are both new and have been at the organization for a while, setting that example is important. But you might not be talking to the CEO or the VP of people culture and DEI every day, but you are working with your team members on a regular basis. And part of that is having those authentic trust built relationships with them, especially for new people who are joining the ezCater team. What are the ways that you create meaningful connection with new team members?
We truly believe that onboarding is the way to do this, right? And so the way that you enter a company really will set you up for success or failure, and not meaning to really be binary, but I think that success looks like being educated on what the culture is, right? So that you know that what you're integrating into, and I don't say assimilating intentionally, because I don't believe in that, but what you want to be a part of. In order to gain a sense of belonging, you have to understand what you want to belong to. So we start with that cultural foundation. And we do that by myself or someone on my team and Amaya, who is our senior manager of DEI, coming together to introduce people to our culture in a way that outlines for them what our standard is, right? What does success look like for us culturally, so that they have some kind of gauge. And when they're in week 3, 4 of their employment and they don't see us showing up the way that we said that we would show up, that gives them an opportunity to reach back out and give us that feedback, right? So it starts that feedback loop and empowering people with a voice. I think also success looks like being able to know where your resources are and what they are. So we start with giving folks resources. I really am a fan of self-service resources, especially if you're in a tech environment and you are not on a huge people team or HR team. That is a way for you to give people what they need without just burning yourself out. I also help people get introduced, especially in this remote environment, to the people resources that they need, right? So meet the payroll team. Meet those folks who are going to enable the work that you do every day, even if they're not the people that are directly on your leadership team or on your peer team. And then allowing people to experience the environment, right? So we give them space after we onboard them to experience. And then we try to circle back with those same folks and understand what that experience looked like for them, right? So what did that first 30, 60, and 90 days look like? Did we show up in the way that we said we were going to show up? What opportunities did you notice that you can give back to us so that we can close those gaps? We try to help folks to integrate into our environment as meaningful parts of the environment, right? Not just kind of cogs in a wheel. We try to stay away from that more old school predatory framework at work, and we try to have a more equitable framework that is reciprocal, right? So we're giving, and we would love to get in return.
Absolutely. I think that's a good question to ask yourself. And what do I want to belong to? And also, what is the culture that is here today as well. And it starts, before the person starts the organization, when they accept their offer, their first 90 days are so critical with the company too. And having those connections with folks across all different teams, not just their manager and immediate team, is really important. Building that trust, you get that feedback. I'm sure that you have gotten lots of feedback over the
Mhm.
past couple of years, but can you share an example of how employee feedback, no matter how it was given to you individually or to the company, has really inspired a change in a policy, strategy, or initiative at ezCater?
Yeah, so I think the best example of that is 2020, right? So we were all kind of collectively shocked in the not only the advent of COVID as kind of this universal experience that we were all going through, where we all had to be kind of locked down for a few months together but separately. But we also had the cultural awakening, and I will say much needed cultural awakening following George Floyd's murder.
Mhm.
And in our business, in our four walls, we are not separate and apart from the world, right? So
Yeah.
our folks leave our four walls and go out into the world. And when they came back, after all of us kind of sitting with that for a little bit and sitting with what does it look like for me to be a part of a society that does not respect the life and liberty of its citizens, right? I think that that kind of prompted people to think differently about how we show up culturally at work. How are we doing the work that we would like to see society do in our four walls?
Mhm.
And so they came back to us with a petition that was signed by most of our employees to really take a deeper look at how we are showing up in a DEI space. And I think that we had done some good work before that, but definitely not enough. I mean, I don't know if it will ever be enough to right size kind of the social imbalance that we all feel and experience. But I think that we tried, right? So we put some real work behind the request, and the request really was to really explore how we are equitable, why we are underrepresented in some groups racially. We do pretty well from a gender perspective. We are female run, so we have a female CEO. That helps. We're doing pretty well there, but racially underrepresented groups, we struggle and we still struggle. It's a tech company, right? And so this is like a tech space struggle. And so what we did was we decided to put some measures in place so that we could measure how we're doing, not just what we're doing. And a lot of those things are qualitative things. We want to hear people's feedback. So we do survey, but most of our surveys have questions where you got to write in an answer. We want to know how you're feeling. We started having more business resource groups or belonging groups,
Mhm.
is what we call them. And we provide space for them. They are not company sponsored or company run, which is a differentiating factor between us and other businesses, right? We don't get in the way of the work. So we provide resources, we provide avenues for communication.
Mhm.
If you want to do something and it's useful for yourself or the community, please do it, and we will give you resources to do that. As long as things are respectful and with dignity and kindness in mind, we're open to it. So we have a lot of employee generated ideas. We started some work around how do we put some measures in place around diversity so that we make sure that it's not how many people are checking a box once we get in, it's
Mhm.
how many people are we looking at, right? Let's start with the slate. How
Mhm.
many people on that slate are diverse? And so we went back to really the foundation of what we do and how we do it to look for those places where equity wasn't showing up, where diversity wasn't being centered or really even considered in some areas. We still have gaps, right? So our board is still a gap. Our C-suite still a gap from a racial perspective, but myself being a VP now, it's changing things. And so, it takes people to open doors, right? And so that I think that was employee led change, because I doubt very seriously that if 2020 hadn't gone down the way that it did, and we didn't have the employee response that we did, that we would have invested so heavily during such a tumultuous financial time for our business, because 2020 really kind of wreaked some havoc on our business financially. And so still investing in that area was huge.
Absolutely. Investing in these resources and really showing up for employees is important, especially, I mean, you and I are both in our homes right now. You can't separate what you do outside of work and how you show up in the world and how you show up in the office, or, the virtual office too. And having that support from leadership is important, and really walking the walk, talking the talk. Employees are really, they are really expecting it from workplaces. And if your workplace doesn't provide it, there are other places that do in the world. In terms of operationalizing that E word, equity, can you share like a couple other examples or how you're really operationalizing that at ezCater today?
Yeah. So equity needs to be baked into everything you do, right? It's not a standalone thing. And so I think there are three elements that help equity show up in every part of decision making, which is important, that just day-to-day decision making, as well as the bigger frameworks that we all work within. One is consistent practices. So how consistent are you with your practices? Are they a suggestion, or are they something that people are held accountable to? That makes the difference. Training is the second piece, right? So once you have the practices and they are consistent, you have to train people to those practices. I would also say that in training folks to the practices, you need to make sure that you're training them on being anti-racist specifically. Unconscious bias is different. That also needs to be a training that everyone in your business needs to take seriously and be a part of. But being anti-racist, especially at a leadership level, is education that most businesses are missing. And it helps your consistent practices show up even in the face of questioning whether this makes sense for this person or for this demographic. And those are unconscious things that we do every day, right? Because we're human. And then the last piece is accountability. So how do you bake this into goals? How do you bake this into expectations? Or how do you create frameworks for success for every level of your organization that include equity, that include diversity and representation, that include inclusion, right? How are you measuring your leaders on those elements in their roles, and how does that show up for them every day? And I think that is kind of the missing link, because most companies will do the first two. They are comfortable with investing some money in training. They're comfortable with having consistent practices because that protects the business, right? But when it comes to that last piece of accountability at every level of the organization, including the C-suite, and how does that show up for you every day, and you having to account for that, I think that's the missing link. And that's why we don't see equity in every business. That's why we don't see it show up consistently.
I definitely agree with that. And plus one, too, if you have unconscious bias training every quarter, that does not mean your organization is equitable. We're not checking a box here as well. And we really want to get specific around what we're talking about here too. So I definitely appreciate those examples. And at every level of the organization and at every level of quote unquote tenure at an organization too, if it's day 5 or day 500. In terms of February 2022, I can't believe we're almost there. How is ezCater honoring and celebrating Black History Month as well?
Yeah, so again, we're trying to move away from a kind of more traditional or old school predatory company framework.
Love it.
So we don't take advantage of these months,
Yeah.
right? We try to give back during these months and not use it as a point of marketing or to kind of put a blurb out there and make our company look a certain way. So we pull back in making these flashy, big, over the top grand gestures during these months. And we just try to focus on how are we supporting our internal community and how are we supporting the community that we serve as a platform, right? And so we're national, we're international. And so we have to look at different ways that people want to be recognized and celebrated. That's not the same across the board in every community, and definitely not the same in every country. And so what we do is we have a belonging group for our Black employees, and we ask So what can you help us understand, not just in general, but today? How would you like to be recognized and celebrated? And we try to do that not just during Black History Month, but during each month that highlights a different underrepresented group, right? So we don't assume and we don't tell people what they need. We ask them what they need, and then we provide space and resources, right? So once we have really an outline of what that month is going to look like for us, from activities to maybe education, book clubs, things that we do, then we provide resources and space to employees who traditionally for us have always volunteered to do this work, right? They're excited about being able to celebrate themselves and celebrate other groups. And so we just provide them resources and space. Time is a big factor for that too, right? So if you're in a company that doesn't provide you with that space during your day, that becomes like a volunteer activity after work. And sometimes people don't have that time. And so we give them time during their workday to participate in this work. And that's how that kind of shows up in a meaningful way for us.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to your earlier point as well of providing that framework, really showing up for employees in the way that they need support, providing that time, space, and resources and actual investment as well. So I think that's really great, not just in February, but 365 days out of the year. Can you tell us a little bit about how you are thinking about innovation and redesigning systems to whether it's a process or kind of initiative at ezCater to be more equitable? I know we've talked about a variety of different elements, but always like to ask.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I'm pretty proud of that we've done, and I think done well over the last 2 years, is looking at performance and development. Because when you think about why you go to work every day and why you're able to keep your job at work every day, it's about your performance, right? So how are you showing up for the business? What are you contributing? What value are you adding? Development is the other side of that. If you look from through an equity lens at that situation, right? So development is what the company gives back to you so that not only are you contributing what you have, but you're gaining something from your experience with the organization. I think that we have redesigned and reimagined what development looks like in our space in
Mhm.
a I geek out on HR, so it's cool for me in a cool way. That is really it gives me energy
Mhm.
to kind of think through and work with our leaders on development instead of us saying to folks, in order for us to develop you, you have to develop into something that we offer as a business. You have to develop into something that, again, in a predatory fashion, will give right back to us. We say you can develop into anything. We want you to think outside of this ezCater 4 wall box. We want you to think about your whole career, your professional and personal life, and what will be fulfilling to you. We have people that are developing into teachers, nurses. We are not a school nor a hospital. And so we support folks in what they want to do with their life.
Mhm.
And the way that that kind of works in a business setting is that we provide coaching, development support at the leadership level, but also at the HR level, right? And I'm a professional coach. We have a few in our organization, and we help to develop transferable skills. And so those transferable skills will help you to get to where you want to be, right? Maybe you want to be a teacher. So you need to be able to stand up in front of folks and have a conversation. You need to be able to lead
Yeah.
a training, right? So we give opportunity. We
Mhm.
also give training. We also give that level of investment. And then we know that those skills, once you gain them, will show up in the work that you do every day. So you'll contribute at a higher level to us, which is great, right? But the real goal is to get you to where you want to be so that you feel engaged the entire way. And we are not just using you, we are also giving back. It's reciprocal. And so that framework is so different and innovative. And I'm just really excited about it. I'm really proud of it.
That's incredible. I was talking to someone the other day about reworking the kind of model for only caring about like an employer, only caring about an employee during the years that they spend and then not thinking about them afterwards. And then other leaders are talking about, the success of us as an organization, as leaders, as managers, to say during my time at ezCater, during my time at this organization, it was great. And it helped me build these skills. And now I'm at this organization, and you have that really great kind of feeling and also feel like the organization cared about you as a
Mhm.
person. So I definitely agree with that too. For folks who know that they want to be people managers or leaders and executives in the future, and the organization provides them those resources. So, with that caveat, what is a must have that the next generation of leaders need to have to be successful, knowing what we know now about kind of the workplace?
Yeah, I think self-awareness. If I could wave a wand and every leader that I work with, every leader in the world had one skill, it would be self-awareness. You need to know who you are and be firm in that, right? Be flexible enough to grow and develop, right? But be comfortable within your own skin.
Mhm.
And you need to know what you need,
Right.
and not be afraid to take up space and ask for what you need and have your needs met. And I think that level of awareness for a leader translates into providing that space for self-awareness at a individual contributor level, or a frontline employee level, because when you come into business, unless you are part of a very small group of folks,
Mhm.
white male, cisgender, hetero, that small group, unless you're a part of that, you
Mhm.
typically aren't given the space to have self-awareness. You can be aware of the microaggressions that are coming at you every day, but you can't say anything about it. You have to ignore it. So that's how the box is built, and that's how people have to kind of contort to get inside of that, right? But breaking that box looks like being able to have environments where people are aware of who they are and what they need, and they say it out loud. And if we could do that at a leadership level, that could change. I don't think that I'm overstepping to say that that could change our world, because most of us have to work every day, and so this is the practice ground for us to be good humans and good citizens.
And it's that reflection, it's that self awareness, again, that growth mindset too, and taking up this space. I love that and think that is important. Understanding that you can ask for help and ask for things that you need to set yourself up for success in the future and beyond. Jen, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with our audience listening, or underscoring 1 to 2 key insights you hope they bring with them after hearing our conversation here today?
Mm. Um, if I when I think about what I want people to walk away with, I think one is that change doesn't happen by osmosis. Change is intentional, and it takes intentional work and intentional insight, from leaders who care about the outcome, not just the process, but the outcome. And then the second is that equity is in all that we do every single day. If you look at any process that you go through at work, any applicable skill that you learn at work, everything has equity in it, right? And so looking through that lens will change the way that you look at yourself and the way that you look at business. And the way that you look at individual people too, right? And their level of success that they're able to attain based on the space that they're given. So I would love for people to walk away with those concepts.
Change does not happen through osmosis. Intentionality. We love to see it. Jen, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. I really enjoyed our conversation as well.
Absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.